Here we go. My name is Katie Weldon, and I want to welcome you to Economic Vibe, Coastal Conservation, and Business Development. Thank you all so much for being here this morning. And this is a part of the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce. And the mission of the Chamber is to connect, inform, advocate, and develop. And I want to thank each of you for taking the time to be here with us this morning. And I especially want to thank our CEO, Ms. Adele Lyons, for being here. And Adele, I think you wanted to speak. Can you hear us, Adele?
I can. Good morning, ladies, and thank you so much for your time and your expertise to share with folks across the coast about the subject matter on conservation, on wetlands, on the environment and development. It all goes hand in hand. It's something that, of course, we always want to see development on the coast, but we want to make sure that our environment is so important. It's what makes people want to live here on the coast, and that we maintain and sustain that. So thank you for your time. We appreciate you, and hope y'all have a nice weekend and everybody's going to stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Adele. We appreciate that. I would also like to bring up again, if you haven't done so, to make sure you check in this event on Facebook via your phone and let people know that you're attending today. So if at any time you have any questions, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A box. Submit your question there, and we're going to get to your questions at the end. Or on the right side of your screen, you'll see there's a chat box. You can submit them there as well. But please keep in mind that the chat box is public information and can be downloaded after this. I would like to thank our sponsors for today's event. We have AGJ Systems and Networks, Gulfport Biloxi International Airport, Goodwill Industries of South Mississippi, Hancock Whitney, Sweatman Security Services, South Group Insurance, and Terracon. Thank you all so much for your sponsorship. Without your support, we wouldn't be able to host great events such as these. And now, I would like to introduce our panelists, Ms. Madeline Walker, Chief Administrative Officer of the Hancock County Port and Harbor Commission, Ms. Allison Anderson with Unabridged Architecture, Lisa Morrison, Senior Geologist from Compton Engineering, and Ms. Judy Steckler, Executive Director of the Land Trust for the Mississippi Coastal Plain. And on that note, I think we are ready to begin. So I would like to introduce our first panelist, Ms. Madeline Walker, Chief Administrative Officer for the Hancock County Port and Harbor Commission. Good morning, Madeline.
Good morning, Katie.
Thank you so much for being here this morning. Just to start out, can you provide a brief overview of the topic and how it's relevant to coastal conservation and business development across the coast?
Absolutely. Thanks for the introduction. I will hop right in. The Port Bienville Industrial Park was established in 1963 and is a rail and maritime served port located in the coastal plain of southwest Hancock County. It was engineered along an industrial canal. Today, Port Bienville boasts nearly 5,500 acres, with approximately 1,200 acres recently acquired to expand the park to the northeast. It's home to a dozen companies, including some of the area's largest chemical and manufacturing plants. That includes DAC Americas and SABIC, which produces plastic resins, Calgon Carbon, which produces activated carbon for air and water filtration, SNF Polychemy produces soluble polymers for water treatment processes, Jindal Tubular produces coiled steel pipe for the water and sewer and oil and gas industries, amongst many others. Port Bienville also contains a short-line railroad that is owned by the Hancock County Port and Harbor Commission. Port Bienville was originally laid out as a planned unit development type of large subdivision. Plans included a dense development of all available property, and initial engineering improvements served to tame the landscape and included things like water diversion channels and drainage ways to constrain wetland formation and drain higher ground. However, over time, maintenance of the engineered structures was ignored, and the environment reclaimed many of the once manufactured features. As environmental regulations became more rigorous, it became more costly to develop the park under its current structure. In 2016, with current new commission and executive leadership, a strategic plan was developed to re-emphasize development along the highly priced waterfront property, however, with a different approach, namely to develop an environmentally driven re-examination of the remaining infill development and look at new upland locations for growth instead of trying to wrestle the existing into submission using adversarial permitting processes and heavy and expensive engineering solutions. The result of that work is a master plan that was developed by the team led by Allison Anderson at Unabridged Architecture. At the same time, two key projects were funded and yet to be built: the complete restoration of the main wharf area, a dock in a location formerly used by Alinea Peninsula to transload containers from other Gulf area ports, which was a $9 million KCDBG funded rehabilitation project. The other project, funded by Restore Bucket 1 funds, was a new rail-to-dock transload facility, which we call the Site 4 transload facility. The Site 4 transload facility is a project that has wetlands, submerged aquatic vegetation, and other issues of environmental concern. But it was also one of our highest and driest properties on the canal. If we couldn't find a way to get this project permitted successfully, it would be unlikely that we would ever develop much more of this valuable maritime space. Using a design competition between multiple engineering firms, we selected Compton Engineering to design this project. Impressed by Lisa Morrison and her team at Compton, they understood our larger desire to work with the environment and not simply pave it over. Lisa would have the responsibility to permit this project in a way that's consistent with our master plan. During the public vetting process for the master plan, we invited a large range of environmental advocates, including Judy Steckler for the Land Trust, to participate. It was through this outreach that we became aware of the mission of the trust and a desire for them to think outside the box on how conservation could be done differently through partnerships with industrial development. In sum, we used our master planning process to identify likely areas for conservation and restoration, designed our latest major project around the master planning principles, and negotiated an MOA with the Land Trust to be a long-term steward and hold us accountable for outcomes. This framework convinced the regulators at the Corps of Engineers that we were creating net benefits to the environment, at the same time impacting construction sites, submerged aquatic vegetation, and wetlands. The approach is replicable and scalable, and as you'll see, we have more conservation areas earmarked for future development offsets. Our permitting responsible mitigation plan, coupled with the conservation easement to the Land Trust, is robust and accountable. The final permit was issued by the Corps last week. We're really excited to tell you guys how all this played out, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison Anderson.
Thanks, Madeline. So Unabridged Architecture has been working on the coast for over 25 years, and we've been really working at the nexus of linking environmental and economic development. So we were really excited to be part of this project. Port Bienville has thousands of acres, but not all of them are easy to develop, nor should they be developed. So our goal for the master plan project was to look at sites for industrial development that had the lowest environmental impact and the least cost. So we began our project, next slide, with a GIS data collection with Envision Partners. And they were fantastic. We looked at 15 different factors, some of which are shown here, including where the wetlands were, what the soil types were like, what the existing land cover was, and what the elevation was. And this is the digital elevation model minus the base flood elevation required by FEMA. And so we put all of those different data layers together and did a weighted analysis of the site. And what that told us was where the best industrial development sites were. And those are the areas you see in the top map in the darkest green. They're the highest ground, they have access to utilities, and they don't have wetlands on them. And so what it also showed us was where the places were that we should really avoid development. The grounds that were low, they were orange or yellow. They had other kind of restrictions, environmental restrictions in place. And so we began to look at these sites, and not surprisingly, many of the best green, dark green sites had already been taken because our ancestors were no dummies, and they put things where they should be on the high ground. So go to the next slide. Any development that happens within the 100-year floodplain should be protected. It should take measures to protect and restore floodplain function. This is a requirement of FEMA and all of the regulators that any new development has to encounter. And so a lot of Port Bienville, as you can see, is within the 100-year floodplain. But there were 3 types of ecosystems, and we were going to come up with a landscape management plan that addressed each of those things. So we have freshwater marshes, and we have tidal saltwater marshes, and we have submerged aquatic vegetation. So we needed to create the conditions for all of these things to thrive and produce some resilience benefits for the existing and future tenants. Next slide, please. So the coastal marshes and aquatic vegetation are really critical habitats. They are ecosystems that act as nurseries for juvenile marine species. They filter and improve water quality, and they provide low maintenance storm buffers. So by creating more coastal marsh, we could have a sort of net gain for projects like this. But we could also protect adjacent sites from flooding if we create more stormwater capacity immediately adjacent to the site. So the transload facility is sort of in the middle of your screen. I don't know if Katie, you can point it out with your cursor. Just to the left of there, where there's a little, yeah, just north of there. So this area where her cursor is right now was the area that was the least suitable for development. It had a number of encumbrances, and really it was the lowest site. So by really putting some protection and restoration effort into that site, we could offset future industrial development. Next slide. So one of the ways we could do that is by removing some of the infrastructure, earthen dams and impoundment that has happened on the site, as Madeline explained, over the decades of development. So reconnecting that hydrology was really important across the site. What it does is it will take out the berms, the solid berms and the culverts, and create a causeway kind of effect where this happens. So we're doing that with one pipeline structure on this site, and then later on we hope to roll it out across the site in more locations. This will actually reduce the chances for flooding at many of the inland sites. Next slide. So here you see the actual aerial condition and our proposed sort of fix for it. By removing those dams, basically, and replacing them with a causeway, it will allow the water to flow more freely. This is an approach that was developed by the Dutch. They have possibly the greatest exposure to sea level rise and storm surge in the world, and they are very advanced at looking at ways to reduce flooding inland and to create ways of living with water. So this is being more and more, this is an approach that the US is more and more adopting and recognizing as effective. Next slide. So this project is the first of many phases of a landscape management plan. This Port Bienville site will be restored through a series of actions. We want to create low maintenance and biodiverse pollinator meadows. We want to recreate some of the pine savannas that were originally on the site, as well as these riparian corridors, which are so important, and the shoreline edges. So this will improve water quality downstream and will help these ecosystems adapt to future disturbances. So this is a really important first step. This is the first of many different steps that Port Bienville will take over the years to reduce their maintenance and reduce flooding and create a better, more stable environment for industrial development.
That's great. Allison, I have a quick question. How can sustainable master planning impact development across the coast?
Sure, let's take this to a wider view. So I think this successful pilot project can make future permitting easier. And I'm sure Lisa is going to talk about this. But the really important thing is to start with good data collection. When we do that, we can understand the parameters that shape the site, that shape the project. And if we allow the environment to sort of tell us the limits of development, I think that's really a valuable lesson that we applied here at Port Bienville. By creating that master plan that establishes the rules for development, the sort of density, the uses, the management of the site, the landscape, access to the site, those kinds of things, that really establishes a very clear path forward for sustainable development. But the master plan also has to establish a vision for the development. It's kind of the building scale, the forms, the materials, that organization between those things that can really reduce the impact on the site. So I think that's a plan that we could apply to multiple different project types, whether they're housing, whether they're multifamily, whether they're industrial sites. That's kind of the way we approach every project.
That's a lot of great information, Allison. Thank you so much. And now I would like to welcome Miss Lisa Morrison, Senior Geologist of Compton Engineering. Lisa, thank you so much for being here with us this morning. And I actually have a few questions for you.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Of course. So can you tell us what role did Compton Engineering play in the creation of the conservation area?
Sure. Well, as mentioned earlier, Compton was selected to do the civil site design and development for what we call Site 4. The project it is along the Port Bienville Canal. It includes construction of a bulkhead and an adjacent dock or laydown yard. Improvements in the uplands, such as roads and railways, and for future development, an additional quayway for barge docking. We're also contracted to do the environmental permitting for the project. So what that involves is getting the approval from the various agencies that have jurisdiction over development along the waterfront. And for this project, those agencies included the Army Corps of Engineers in the Vicksburg District, the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality, and the Department of Marine Resources. So each agency has their own specific interest, and we have to prepare a permit application that addresses their particular interest. Usually results in them asking additional questions after the initial permit application is involved, and we kind of work back and forth in getting all of the details of the project to them. The project as designed included impacts to tidal marsh, freshwater wetlands, and SAV, which is submerged aquatic vegetation. That's things such as eelgrass. Part of the process, we had to delineate the amount of wetlands that were going to be impacted and the quality of these wetlands. We had to evaluate alternate designs with the goal of avoiding the impacts, including looking at alternate locations, alternate lengths and widths of the planned bulkhead and laydown yard, variations of the footprints of everything that was going to be happening on that site. And we had to design and permit the stormwater management plan. So once all of the alternates were evaluated and we were convinced we had the best design with the least impact that still met the port's needs, we were able to identify the impacts and begin to plan for how to mitigate for those impacts. Usually you're able to purchase mitigation credits from a mitigation bank that has been approved by the Corps of Engineers. This project would need to purchase credits because there are freshwater forested impacts, but there are no credits available for impacts to tidal marsh or SAV. You have to come up with another plan. You have to either preserve, create, or enhance existing wetlands for those impacts. So this was the initial impetus for development of the permitting responsible mitigation plan.
Great. And I think that kind of goes into question number 2 and how it played in that concept, correct?
Sure. Since Allison and Unabridged had done their work with the master plan, identifying areas that were best for development and areas that were better used for conservation, we knew that the acreage to the south of the Site 4 project area had already been identified as a great area for conservation. So we focused our mitigation on that area. The port wouldn't have to purchase any new property. They already owned it. They didn't have to get any easements or rights of way or that sort of thing to do work on that site. So the plan includes, in the spirit of the master plan, the permitting responsible mitigation plan includes removing 2 berms that are on that mitigation site that are hindering surface flow, have altered the hydrology, and hinder tidal inflow along the canal. All of these impediments to the hydrology have allowed invasive species to take over and has degraded the habitat. So the plan will involve removing those berms, allowing the original natural flow to reestablish itself. There will be some minimal earth moving to get the elevations correct for the vegetation that we know should be there, and then we'll do some planting to restore some of that original vegetation to restore the habitat. So the plan itself includes 12 issues that are required by the Corps of Engineers to be addressed in order to be approved. So one of those requirements is to develop a site protection instrument. There are various ways of doing it, but we proposed, and the port agreed, that a third-party conservation easement was a good idea. This puts the responsibility of the long-term management of the conservation area outside of the port's responsibility. It serves as a measure of having that third eye looking at it to ensure that it's not developed in the future. The Corps liked that conservation easement plan, so they actually allowed the port to not have to purchase the mitigation credits for the freshwater emergent wetlands, and use the mitigation site and that preserved and enhanced area as all of the mitigation that they would need to do for this project.
So I know you talked about a little bit about the agencies that you worked with, but how did you work with them and to find this solution?
So it is basically a collaboration with the agencies. The agencies have to approve the design with regards to environmental impacts. So they're looking at things of how much have you avoided, how much are you impacting, can you put dock somewhere else, can you make it smaller, or that sort of thing. So the plan is just as an example. Our planning, the design does have some impacts to SAB. So we are proposing to, and it has been approved, to relocate the SAB, and it's been done in Port Bienville once before, and I believe it was successful. But DMR suggested that a wave attenuator be placed along the canal to protect the SAB once it's moved and until it's well established. So they had input such as that, and the DEQ had input on the stormwater design to make sure that their needs are met. And basically there's a lot of back and forth. They ask a lot of questions and we provide a lot of answers. So it is kind of a collaboration.
Absolutely. And teamwork makes the dream work, right? So, and I think the question that's on everybody's mind, and especially the attendees, is how can this model impact future development across the coast?
Well, as Allison said, as this kind of a pilot project, with a successful PRM project, it should allow other agencies, other entities that are wanting to do development that think they can't, it allow the agencies to understand that this can be implemented successfully. And I think it'll just open up this idea of permitting responsible mitigation to further use along the coast.
Sure. Well, thank you, Ms. Lisa. And I think we have a couple of slides on here if you want to explain what we're looking at.
Sure. The slide on the right, on the top right, that is our, that's the mitigation area, and you can see that there is an impoundment of that surface water flow. So that's what the goal of what we're doing with this mitigation is, to reestablish that surface water flow. The one on the left is the plan for the mitigation area, just showing where we're moving SAV to, where we're reestablishing marsh, and where we're going to reestablish tidal flow. And the inset small one is a picture of what you might see along the canal that is SAV. The vegetation that doesn't stick its head up above the water is SAV. So we have to protect that.
We have to, absolutely. And then I think these are some of the agencies that you were working with, correct?
Sure. The Corps of Engineers, they gather all of the inputs and comments from the DEQ, the Department of Marine Resources, Fish and Wildlife, MDH, a lot of agencies, state agencies have input into the permitting process, and the Army Corps of Engineers gathers it all together and ultimately puts it all together in a permit.
Well, that's great information, Ms. Lisa. And I mean, you sound super knowledgeable about all of this. So thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
Next up, I would like to introduce Ms. Judy Steckler, who is the Executive Director for the Land Trust for the Mississippi Coastal Plain. Hey, Ms. Judy, how are you this morning?
Good morning.
So just to start us out, what is the Land Trust?
Land Trust, we'll have the first slide, please. The Land Trust are nonprofit organizations that have been established for the specific purpose of protecting lands. The Land Trust for the Mississippi Coastal Plain looks for lands to protect that have an ecological, cultural, and scenic significance along the Mississippi Gulf Coast coastal plain area. That is the lower 6 coastal counties. Our land trust was established 20 years ago, and we have had a great experience working on the coast in preserving lands that meet our mission. The IRS recognizes land trust as publicly supported charitable organizations. There are over 1,300 land trusts in the United States, which are protecting 56 million acres of farms, wetlands, wildlife habitat, urban gardens and parks, forest, watersheds, coastline, river corridors, and trails. The Land Trust has, since its establishment, has acquired 106 parcels of land consisting of 10,400 acres. So we are very pleased that we are helping to protect the very important part of our coastal area, and are happy that we have having the opportunity to work with economic development. The next slide, please. A conservation easement is a legal agreement between a landowner and the trust permanently limiting the property's uses. So that's a conservation easement. Most of you probably own property and you have a deed. And with this deed, you have a lot of rights that have come with the ownership of the land. You have the right to develop, the right to add roads or trails, right to clear cut, water rights, mineral rights, air rights. So you are the owner of all of these rights. If you choose, you may place a conservation easement on your land, and with that, you are deciding to donate some of these rights to protect the land in perpetuity. And of course, these would be from the list that I mentioned earlier. The rights that the Land Trust is particularly interested in are rights of development and rights to clear cut. And most of the properties that we acquire, if it's not just cultural or scenic, of course, are wetlands. And so we are looking to protect these properties as wetlands. But we also have a philosophy of public use. And that's whenever possible, we develop trails on our properties. But with conservation easements, the landowner retains those rights, and therefore he is not giving up the right to public use. So some of the land trust lands do have public use and others do not. A conservation identifies in very detail the rights that the owner is transferring to the easement holder. But additionally, it spells out in much detail the rights that they are retaining. And all of this was established with a Mississippi code, the 2013 code, which Title 89, Chapter 19, gives all of the information that is required to establish legally a conservation easement on your property. The next slide, please.
Sure. Ms. Judy, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
So what makes this collaboration innovative, and what impacts do you feel it can have on coastal development?
Well, the 26-acre conservation easement that we're holding on the Hancock County Port and Harbor Commission lands began as a collaborative effort. You heard from Lisa talking about how the Commission and the Vicksburg Corps of Engineers worked together to establish a method that would be innovative and exciting. It is at least exciting in the conservation community, because this is the first time we have been offered the opportunity to hold a preservation easement. We have always felt that no mitigation is the best mitigation. Using plans like Allison has developed for the Port Commission, you're making the project fit the land instead of trying to make the land fit the project by filling in wetlands, clear cutting forest. So that was a collaborative beginning, and the Land Trust was very excited to become part of that collaboration. So in this case, the lands that we will be holding, the 26 acres, the wetlands have been improved, and it will be the responsibility of the Land Trust to make sure that these actions are protected. The easement clearly states that the easement is retaining and protecting natural, scenic, and open space values, protecting natural resources, maintaining or enhancing air and water quality, and preserving the historical, archaeological, and cultural aspects of this property. And it's my understanding there's a lot of culture and history on these particular lands going very, very far back. So the Land Trust was very pleased to become a partner and will be the holder of the conservation easement. And this is a preservation easement. Normally, what would happen if you were required by the agencies to mitigate, then it would be a costly or add cost to your project, depending on the type of wetlands that were being impacted and the requirement. When you're impacting an acre of wetlands, then you're required at a minimum to mitigate an acre. Depending on the quality of the wetlands being impacted, it can be from a ratio of 1 to 1, 1 to 5, or it may, for high quality wetlands, reach as high as 10 to 15 acres to the 1 acre you've impacted. There are a number of mitigation banks on the coast and are available for that type of mitigation. But it was exciting and very innovating to see the preservation, and the Land Trust was very happy to become the easement holder. During this restoration process, the Land Trust is monitoring, observing, and after it's completed, after the Corps has, during the 5-year period of the restoration work and the monitoring to make sure it's established, the Land Trust is required to file an annual report of compliances on these requirements. After that, we will be responsible to make sure that all of the changes stay in place and continue to allow the wetlands to function, to provide all of those services, clean air, clean water, that we have become reliant upon to give us the quality of life that we have. The next slide, please. This project, being so innovative, we hope will set the standard for future projects where wetlands will not be impacted except in the rarest cases, and preservation will become the norm. So it's been exciting for the Land Trust to work with such a new project and to work with economic development. The mission of the Land Trust has always allowed us to work with developers, and it has been a pleasure to work when we can offer a service, especially this one, where in the future we look for many more sites along the coast that look like this. And the visitors that come are coming for visual as well as the pleasure of the beach and the water. So they often comment about the green spaces that are on the coast. And that's the contribution that the Land Trust is happy to be contributing to make our coast such a great place. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Judy. And I think that might be everything. Madeline, do you want to explain what slide we're looking at right here?
Yes, so at the end, we have attached the master plan that was referenced throughout the presentation by Unabridged Architecture and Allison. And we've also attached the final permit. It contains the conservation easement, the MOA, and the PRM. We bundled all three and filed them so that in perpetuity, they are all bundled together so they're never lost. So that is our legal document that we all referenced here. So if any of you wanted to go and pull it up for, for future projects and mimic what we did, that's why we wanted to make it available to you all here today.
A lot of great information today. Thank you all so much. It looks like we do have a question. Let's see. If this is the first of its kind, can you see other states adopting this? Who wants to answer that one?
I think I can answer part of it. The preservation method is, there are lots, because of you can use mitigation banks for your mitigation, but the Corps allowing preservation is new in this area. So it will all depend on the Corps of Engineers and the other permitting agencies as to whether or not they will allow it. I think in Louisiana is one example, because that was the example of a conservation easement that the Corps could provide to us, was Louisiana. They had none, no others in Mississippi. So this was a first for this area. So I'm hoping that not only will the Vicksburg Corps, but maybe there's a possibility that the Mobile Corps will begin to see that preservation is a good idea as well.
Absolutely, that's the hope. Does anybody else want to tack on to that answer? No?
Well, we
Go ahead, Lisa.
we are also working on a project in Moss Point that is using permitting responsible mitigation. So The plan has been approved and we're just waiting on the final permit. So it will be ongoing. There will be more.
That's really exciting. Madeline, did you want to say anything?
Yep, that answered it in my opinion.
Awesome. Okay, so while we're waiting for some more questions to come in, if you want to use your chat box on the right hand of your screen to ask a question, or at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. Feel free to ask all the questions you want. I would like to thank our sponsors for today's event again. That's ATJ Systems and Networks, Gulfport Biloxi International Airport, Goodwill Industries of South Mississippi, Hancock Whitney, Sweatman Security Services, South Group Insurance, and Terracon. And it looks like we may have another question. All right. If an entity has a master plan for a large state, do you have a list of steps that you would recommend to follow for this process? I don't know who that would go to, so just.
Well, I'll give it a shot. I don't have a prepared list, but I think the first thing to do is to establish partners that you want to work with. You have a master plan, identify the agencies, of course, that you will need to go through for permitting, identify what firms, engineering firms, surveyors, restoration ecologists, other environmental scientists that you may want to work with, and then, of course, identify the third-party holder for the easement, which we hope you'll consider the land trust for doing so.
Sure. Did anybody else want to add to that?
Sure, I'll jump in. I think the importance of architecture in actually sort of fulfilling the master plan shouldn't be ignored, because a lot of times you can get a great master plan and then the architecture doesn't quite fit in with the landscape. So I think that's a really important part of the actual final development. And again, I would reiterate what Judy said, finding these partners like Compton Engineering, like the Land Trust, like the client group that's the Port and Harbor Commission, that are really open to that sort of collaboration is really important.
A lot of great information. We do have another question. Is there a significant cost difference in this method than traditional mitigation?
I'll try to answer that. There can be a significant cost difference, but it all depends on what you're impacting, and the quality of your impact of the wetlands that you're impacting, and how much your permitting responsible mitigation plan is going to cost you, because there is some cost to do the restoration work, removing the invasive species. There is some construction work to remove the berms, and then if there were credits to purchase, they range from, now it's market driven, they range from anywhere from $5,000 to maybe $10,000 a credit. So it's really project specific if you're going to save money or if it's going to cost you money. But in the long run, it will likely save you money.
Does anybody else want to add on to that? No? All right. Well, while we're waiting for some more questions to come in, I want to thank each of you so much for being here. Madeline, Lisa, Judy, Allison, thank you so much. Madeline, do you have any final closing thoughts?
No, just thank you all for hopping on today and hearing the exciting work that we've all done together. We hope it's duplicated throughout the coast and expanded upon. We're really excited and proud of the team that we worked with, and excited to see what future projects are ahead.
Absolutely. Miss Lisa, any closing thoughts?
Thank you for having me. I'm always happy to share permitting stories and information.
Absolutely. Miss Allison, any closing thoughts?
We're really proud of this master plan and excited about how it sets up the Port and Harbor Commission for the future and for this intensification of industrial development in a place that already has so much infrastructure and so much to offer. And so this is really important step in making sure this process keeps working. So we're excited about all of the future actions that are going to happen.
Absolutely. And Miss Judy, any closing remarks?
Totally. The Land Trust has a website. If you want to know more about the Land Trust and the projects we do, we have kept our trails open through the this pandemic, and we have encouraged people to use the trails, and we're finding they're using them very much. But they're all on the website. We'd love to have questions. If you have questions about the Land Trust, about land donations or conservation easements, call the Land Trust office and we'll be happy to assist you. And again, we were very excited to be a partner with this great group and this great project.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much again for being with us this morning. And this is the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce's Economic Vibe. If you are not a member of the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce, you can go to our website, mscoastchamber.com. We'd love to have you. And also, if you are a member, don't forget to come pick up your Open for Business signs, letting people know that you are open for business and ready to start working again. So I want to thank you all so much for being here with us again. Thank you again, Madeline, Lisa, Judy, and Miss Allison. We really appreciate your time today. And if you have any questions or if you thought of something after this, please feel free to send me an email and I'll pass it along to whoever I think might be best to answer it. My email is Katie, Katie, at mscoastchamber.com. And on that note, I hope everybody has a great chamber day. Thank you so much again, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Katie.